Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast and good morning to everyone else. I'm Eric Swerdlin, CEO of GiftingNetwork, and welcome to our webinar series on philanthropy and wealth management. At GiftingNetwork, we provide advanced services for online and framework for endowments, foundations, and their investment managers and financial services providers. And we offer advanced philanthropic solutions for private wealth management clients as well with branded DAFs, Family Philanthropy. We're delighted to co-host today with our friends at GreenHill. We started working with GreenHill Investment Reporting a number of years ago when we sought a reporting solution for a community foundation client of ours. They had several different pools and were looking for a more sophisticated reporting solution at the pool level and also at the fund level. This client had agencies and funds that were invested in multiple pools, and they wanted to provide a blended performance report. Moreover, gifts came into these assets, these pools and funds at an irregular pace, as did grants go out. And the GreenHill team was able to enable us to start offering this solution. Let me introduce my co-host and good friend, Bill McFadden of GreenHill.
Eric, thank you very much. GreenHill did partner with GiftingNetwork, so we could offer very clear, concise, and transparent reports illustrating how donations or investments are performing over time, what fees are involved, the account activity, and any changes in fund management, and of course, much more. As everyone on this call knows, communication and clarity are very important to donors. Granting, gifting history, and investment performance are among the top details that donors seek when they access their donor advised fund platform. Through GreenHill's partnership that Eric illustrated with their DAF platform, we're pleased to be able to provide our mutual clients with first-class performance, one of just the many solutions donors have now come to expect. We recognize that offering this transparent view of their pools and the fund's investment performance can make a significant difference in maintaining donor trust and satisfaction. And that's what it's all about, trust and satisfaction. Thank you very much for attending, everyone. And with that, I will hand it off to Greg Murray, who will moderate the discussion. It's all yours, Greg.
All right. Let's give it a hand for our CEOs there, Bill and Eric. Good job. Thank you for your intros. Like Bill said, Greg Murray with GiftingNetwork. Happy to be your MC today. And really appreciate everyone that's taken time out of their day to attend this webinar. But even a bigger thank you to our star-studded panelists that have volunteered to participate in the webinar today. So with further ado, I will introduce the group. So we can start with Elizabeth.
Greg, thanks, and good afternoon, good morning. So I'm Elizabeth Wagner. I lead the endowment, foundation, and charitable practice at Bryn Mawr Trust. And a little fun fact, before coming over to the dark side, I helped lead a community foundation, which is why I will always bleed DAFs and love this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. Teresa?
Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa Araco Rogers. I started my career in the investment management space working at a company called SEI. I then started my own firm, Harp Weaver, to provide services to families, individuals, really funders of all types as a complement to the services being offered by investment managers.
Great. Thank you so much. Charity. And I want you all to know, we didn't choose Charity because of her name, but even though it is fitting for this webinar, but because of her expertise. Thank you for joining us, Charity.
Thank you, Greg. My name is Charity Olson. I'm the Director of Trust for Associated Trust Company. I've been with them for 20 years, and currently in my role, I partner with many nonprofits that are in our footprint in the Midwest, and we assist with developing investment policy statements and helping them align their goals with their investment portfolio to make sure it's prudent for the work that they're trying to achieve. I am a native of Wisconsin, so I have to give a shout out to the Green Bay Packers since I happen to be a fan. And we're excited about winning 2 games with a backup quarterback. So just had to throw that out there.
Awesome. Thank you. Last but not least, Michael.
Thank you. Michael Dixon with Pool Consulting and Training. For almost 50 years, we've helped community institutions with growth, profitability, efficiency. When I say community institutions, I mean community banks, independent trust companies, RIAs, or even independent brokerage operations. And we do that with training, and we do that with process, and we do that with structure organization. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois, but right now, today, I'm coming to you from San Antonio, Texas, because you've always got to be somewhere.
You are always somewhere. Last week I talked to you, you're in Alabama, now you're in Texas. You never know where Michael's going to be. He's like, where's Waldo? Perfect. Well, let's get started today with an easy one. So, why do clients actually give, right? What are their motivations to give money to nonprofit organizations? Would like to start off?
I can start off. I think motivations can vary greatly when it comes to money. I mean, it's extremely personal. So often we're seeing clients giving money away because their values align with a particular organization. And, quite frankly, there's been a lot of studies that people give money away because when they feel like they make a difference, it makes them feel good, it makes them happy. Some studies have even tied it to mental and physical health. And so I think each person is motivated differently. I'd like to think that's the reason why most people do it. There's a moral duty or the feeling good, but a lot of times it's also having an awareness of how they can make a difference. Sometimes people are making donations not because they're necessarily passionate about something, but somebody made them aware of a need in the community or a need within our culture. And so they step up and help out. And then other times it's to employ some tax advantages that are out there.
Perfect. Great. Anyone else want to touch on this?
I'd love to add a little bit. I do think that sense of people feeling an obligation is so often a driver. Sometimes that obligation is cultural, right? You were raised thinking about giving as something everybody does. And sometimes it's more nuanced. It's more about feeling like people have what they need and then more, and they feel an obligation to give some back. So that sense of obligation I find in a lot of our philanthropic clients. I also think it's worth talking about some of the social motivations of giving, right? Rarely is tax the primary consideration, but often in our own little social world, there are places we want to go or people we want to see, and giving can be helpful to that. Sometimes I see people who are trying to make a very specific type of social change. They're very strategic philanthropists. Those are really fun because they know what they're doing and they're just aimed right at it, and they're willing to keep pressing forward year after year. Those are in the minority, though. Most philanthropists give either because of that sense of obligation or because the idea of creating impact gives them some kind of joy or meaning.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Greg, I would only add that I think there's another thing that happens here, which is generational. I think when we focus on the older population, they very much were raised with a philanthropic sense, with an obligation sense, and that is cultural, and their giving tends to follow that pattern. But when we look at much younger cohorts, their giving becomes much more, as Elizabeth pointed out, much more result driven or purpose driven. And at the same time, we run into this problem that we have this group of people in their middle age who maybe didn't get raised with the cultural imperative. And they're sort of stuck in this, they don't know how to give. And we need to help them understand how to give. Sometimes that conversation starts with tax advantages, but a lot of times it starts with having them be aware of needs. And I think a lot of the people who are tuned into this webinar are representing those needs. And we have to remember to go back to the beginning, explain the need and help people understand how they can give.
Following along those lines, the families that I work with, philanthropy is a great tool to both bring the family together, keep the family together, but also provide some education and exposure to their children, look beyond the world that they've provided for their children, and, maybe take a more worldly view of the issues that are impacting those communities that surround where they live, work, play, go to school.
Thank you for those comments. And I think it's a great segue to the next question to the group. Who's heard about this great wealth transfer?
Yeah.
Everyone, right? I think we're in the midst of it. The numbers get higher and higher as the years go on, 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever it is, it's a monstrous number, right? And the number that in our world that I believe gets overlooked is the 12 trillion that's earmarked for charity already. So how can advisors take advantage of this opportunity over the next several decades? And I guess another question on top of that, and please touch on any of the questions that you want. How can the advisors really play a central role in their clients' philanthropy so that they make the biggest impact with the charities that they care about most? And during this wealth transfer, how can they really retain, but also see this as an opportunity to capture more assets moving forward?
So Greg, I would love to talk about why the 12 trillion, the smallest piece of the wealth transfer, is actually the most interesting for us as advisors. And this is sort of the center of my thinking with multi-generational families. When I watch clients engage their kids and grandkids, it's really hard for them to start in the family business or in the family balance sheet. For almost every ultra high net worth family where we're thinking multi-generationally, the first balance sheet the kids and grandkids ever see is the foundation. And a lot of times that's where the conversations about values take place. Yeah. And so I think for us who want to be multi-generational advisors to families, there's this incredible opportunity to engage. Yes, it's only 12 trillion of the 80, but it's the 12 trillion where families are having meaningful conversations, where they're willing to pay for philanthropic advisory to work with multiple generations. This is our chance to become that most trusted advisor at the table, that quarterback advisor who understands what each generation wants to achieve and helps the charitable wealth flow through generations. So I think that piece, the 12 million for charity, gives us the opportunity today to have those conversations with the parents and grandparents as they're thinking about, how do I communicate this to my heirs? And what do I want my heirs to learn from and maybe do about the stories I tell them about my values and motivations? So just a huge opportunity for us to enter that family conversation.
Absolutely. Love it.
And Greg, I would add to Elizabeth's comments. I think education is so important. And, we have that $12 trillion amount out there, and the actual dollar amount that will actually transfer, the 80 trillion, we've seen, I think, up to 90 at some points. I think that dollar amount will change significantly and will continue to grow as education happens with family members. Yeah. And the other thing is, baby boomers tend to be more private about their plans than their children are, or than their children even want them to be. So this means there could be funds that are earmarked that they're going to give away even before they pass, or even have in their estate plan, but they're not willing to share yet with that next generation. So I think, as Elizabeth pointed out, showing them that balance sheet of the foundation is a great opportunity for them to start educating the next generation. And it's an opportunity for those baby boomers to start talking about something that they're not necessarily comfortable talking about. Many of them just don't want to talk about their finances. And this is a good way to do that without actually opening up to what they have entirely with their family and with that next generation.
Yeah, I would say, as both Charity and Elizabeth said, wealth advisors do have an important seat at the table. They understand very holistically the complete wealth picture of a family. But I would say it's not the only seat at the table. And, when you ask very specifically about sort of how do they best position themselves, I think it's the ability to work with other experts, other advisors, to work collaboratively and to work seamlessly with those advisors. So whether they're people like me that are providing the philanthropic advising aspect of it, that needs to work very hand in hand with the sort of financial management or investment side of things.
Ooh,
Greg,
Teresa. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. Teresa, I just want to build on that and say, for those of you who are working with families who have a philanthropic advisor, that person is your secret weapon. So I just want to encourage all of us to think about dig into that relationship as advisors between you and the philanthropic advisor, because that's the person who has the family's trust often the most in the process. They're telling her the most, and she is getting the values conversation out in public. And so use her.
Elizabeth is making a point that I wanted to circle back to, which is who is the person with the relationship? If the family's already created a foundation, then they have that in place and they have certain staffing around it, whether it's employed or consultant. I'm interested, as Greg asked the question, what can the advisor do? If the advisor is working with a family that has not yet made these plans, I submit that the advisor has the primary seat at the table because they're the one in the most contact. The estate planning attorney is an infrequent, once every X number of years. Maybe there's a CPA, but the CPA is really worried about taxes. The investment advisor is the person that has the most contact and the most opportunity to raise questions. And I would hope that advisor would have in their hip pocket someone like Teresa, someone like Elizabeth, someone that they would bring to the meeting, someone that they would bring into the partnership. So now we're bringing real resources to the family.
You know, I do think about, you know, the families who I work with, they are being solicited all the time and by very savvy institutional development people, whether that is coming from their alma mater or their children's schools, whether that's coming from the hospital that cared for their parents, whether that is their church where they attend. But that conversation can get very complex, and without the help of both an investment advisor and I think a philanthropic advisor, you know, the values, the best interests of those families could be lost.
That's precisely where I was trying to drive this conversation, Teresa. It's super important to understand the person with the long-term, consistent relationship can drive this process if they get in front of it. And if they don't get in front of it, then those individual solicitors, and I have nothing against those people in that business. Those are, you know, honorable professions. And yet they aren't long-term engaged with the family the way the financial advisor or the philanthropic advisor should be.
Yeah. And so on that topic, so philanthropy, right? Sometimes it's an afterthought, but we all see the studies. And still, advisors are not having this conversation with their clients, right? I don't know why. I'm sure you all don't know why. We all know the opportunity. So why is it that philanthropy should be an integral part of the advisor's holistic wealth management offering? Like, what are the benefits? And then how does it really align with their long-term financial goals, their values, and ultimately building and deepening that relationship, not only with the client, but with their family?
That's precisely the issue, Greg. If I'm going to build a long-term beneficial to both parties relationship with a family, I need to understand how they move, how they tick, what goes on there. And I'm going to figure that out by driving to these kinds of conversations. If I only talk about the assets, if I only talk about the portfolio, if I only talk about the returns, I'm never getting close to the things that are most valuable to that family. And they're not ever feeling like I'm truly engaged, I truly care about them. So it's a chicken or the egg kind of conversation to me. I've got to go there to have them talk to me about what's meaningful and important so that they will then be more connected to me. I've got to do that.
Yep, absolutely.
It's actually surprising to me because 25 years ago, my job at SEI was to go around and help financial advisors figure out how to have a conversation about philanthropy with their clients. And we're 25 years later, and we're still sort of like talking about that question of why are financial advisors not having this conversation about philanthropy? And, for the people at this table, it's so obvious when you're developing a relationship with a family or an individual. They talk about themselves, they talk about the family, they talk about the communities that they care about. And philanthropy plays a role in each one of those.
Absolutely.
There's another. Oh, go ahead, Joy Charity.
Oh, I apologize, Michael. I think it's the foundation. I mean, understanding what your client values and what their goals are is critical to the whole financial planning process and any of the strategies that are employed. So if an advisor develops that connection and understands those values, they're able to help navigate that client through the various stages of their life. And we've been talking about this during this webinar. Often that advisor is the longest relationship that these clients have. And so they need somebody that they feel comfortable with, that understands them. And that trust is built over time by understanding their values. And as they're able to do that, they can present strategies, including often introducing somebody, if they don't have a philanthropic advisor, bringing somebody in and introducing them to help navigate that portion. But it is interesting that it is a missing piece so often. A lot of times I think advisors want to get through a financial plan and they skip that piece of asking, what kind of legacy do you want to leave? What kind of impact do you want to see while you're still here? And I think that's just a natural question to be able to open the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The numbers are just staggering, right? Once the patriarch passes away, right? The percentages of women, the matriarch, leaving that current financial advisor are skyrocketing and are very high. And once the patriarch and the matriarch both pass away, that number jumps to 91%. And numbers do show that if advisors and when advisors really lead in with philanthropy and engage with that next generation, that number from 91 decreases significantly. So I always say the proof is in the pudding, and we're always advising advisors to lead in. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable, but to have that conversation and engage with not only the patriarch, but also the matriarch and the next generation and the family as a whole.
That's a big distinction, though, Greg. In the number of years that I sat with widows who were bringing assets to my institutions because they hated that quote unquote in the city who always talked to their husband and never talked to them.
Yep.
They were women of a certain era. And I don't like to throw rocks at my elders, right? In those times, maybe that passed for good selling, that you only talk to the man.
Mm-hmm.
As I look at my peers, and especially as I look at people 10, 15 years younger than me, that's not the way decisions are made around the kitchen table anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The kitchen table is now a democracy where everybody has a voice. And very rarely do you run into a family where the patriarch is making decisions out of context, right? But our world as advisors still leans on these old rules. Well, got to decide who the decision maker is and got to sell to them. No, you don't. You've got to get everybody's feelings out. And these conversations about foundations are writ large, but even in smaller pools of money, I need to know what the matriarch thinks. I need to know what the kids think, because we also are in a generational situation now where people are living so much longer. The kids are well into their giving years by the time they inherit, and that changes the game as well.
Spot on. Spot on. All right. How about in regards to, I would say account activity, right? And fee transparency in financial reporting. Why is that so important to philanthropic clients that are managing donor advised funds?
Greg, I think transparency in any relationship is critical, but particularly when you're talking about people's finances. So making sure that you're clear with the fees and activity is incredibly important to building that trust. And so any advisor should be able to explain the fees and the activity and be able to explain it so that they know that these dollars, which are not just dollars for them to grow old on, but to make a difference somewhere else in the community, have a different meaning.
Mhm.
And so we need to be able to take the time to articulate it. And I go back to, we've been talking about the next generation, to educate every single stakeholder and to make sure that they understand whether it's fees, whether it's activity, anything related to these relationships. Anybody can ask a question. We should feel very comfortable answering it, and sometimes answering it more than once, and sometimes answering it in a different format so that every individual can understand.
Absolutely.
Charity, bravo. Right. And I think the other piece is getting them comfortable with what to expect in a charitable vehicle, but also providing that education, Charity, that you were talking about, so they understand that DAF uniquely is no longer their personal asset. They don't actually have to care about every single transaction. If they're happy with the overall level of service and fee pattern, I think sometimes we can help free them from thinking about every relationship as transactional and help them understand sometimes you can't even mandate the same factors with your DAF that you can in your personal portfolio. Let's measure impact any way you want. Right? Is impact for your family? I have all my kids and grandkids working out of the family giving vehicle. Right? Is impact for your family? I've given a substantial amount to a couple of charities I really care about over time. Is it I had a complex asset and I really wanted to make it charitable, and the only vehicle that really worked was a DAF, right? I do think here we have an opportunity to help our clients step back from that idea that all financial advisors have transactional relationships with them, and remind them that the charitable asset is special, it's unique. They can measure it differently. And as long as they feel they have good transparency around that reporting, right? Obviously, that's key. They can start to measure the impact of these funds in different ways that make them happier.
Yeah, I would also say that it's not a singular charitable asset. Most of the families that I work with give in from a variety of sources. The DAF is certainly one, but gifting directly, and whether that's check writing or appreciated securities, whether it's gifting from IRA distributions, whether it's participating in a tax credit program like we have in Pennsylvania called EITC, or whether it's giving from, a structured charitable gifting vehicle like a donor advised fund. That's a lot of different pools where money can come out of to go to charities. And honestly, families and individuals lose track. They're solicited all the time by organizations, and it's very easy to lose track of, did I give to that organization already? I mean, when I work with some of my clients, like that's like their number one question that they ask me, like, Teresa, have I given to them already? They just lose track of it. So I do think, kind of easy access to reporting and kind of the ability to consolidate reporting for your clients, and, no matter what pool it's coming out of, is really important for families.
I want to circle back to this conversation about transactions, right? When we talk about transactions, we in this business tend to be talking about the fees or the checks or the transfers. I'm also interested in the value of the DAF because it detransactionalizes, if that's a word, the giving. All of those institutional gift officers are soliciting the donor, saying, give now, we'll put your name on this. Give now and you'll pay for this. Give now and we'll do this. I love the DAF because it allows the family to make a strategic giving decision that is not tied to the transactional giving decision with the charity. And that's really important. And it's one of the reasons I think a lot of charities push back on the DAF. They don't like it because it disintermediates, to use a big banking term. But I love it. I'm a Chicagoan, so Kahneman and Tversky, thinking fast and slow, all really important to me. I think it's critical that we have the DAF as a vehicle to slow down those decisions so that they can be more meaningful and more aligned with family values, and they don't get caught up in a give by 12/31 or give by this campaign date or whatever. I think it's a great tool for everybody to use.
And I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but there is a brand new DAF, Day of Giving, that's just, sort of trying to be promoted. October 10th is the day.
No idea, Teresa. That's genius. I'm not positive about it, but I'm respecting the marketing value.
Absolutely. Perfect. You've all touched on it, when you discuss, and I'm curious to hear about illiquid assets, complex assets, right? And why advisors should be really evaluating the client's holistic realm of assets that they own, if it's artwork, if it's a business, what have you, and why is giving or contributing illiquid assets really a smart or strategic way to funding your charitable vehicle today?
So, Greg, it's interesting. Recently, I ran into a situation where someone used a family business to fund their DFA, and it was simply because they didn't have a succession plan in place. Nobody in the family wants to take over the business, and they don't have somebody that is willing to buy the business right now, and yet they know there's a lot of opportunity. And so they felt like, as a family, they came together and talked about it. And since the next generation didn't have an interest, but they are very concerned about their community, they decided to put it into the donor advised fund, knowing that they can make a difference later on down the road, and a significant difference without having to pay taxes on it either. So it was, going back to what we talked about earlier, it was a family decision. It wasn't just one person making that decision. And so in some cases, the next generation was going to forego a pretty large amount of money. Maybe they don't understand the full dollar amount right now because it's not a saleable asset, but they know in the future it will be. So the strategy can be very different of why people are doing it. But in that case, I found that to be very interesting and unique, and also very collaborative, that everybody worked together. And in the end, it will be positive for their entire family. So I think we do see an uptick, and it could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that a succession plan is not in place. It could be that they don't, want a large asset that will be significantly appreciated to be have tax consequences. So I think the variety of reasons that we see it are out there. But I just wanted to share one I ran into recently.
Great story. And I always love to hear, and always want to remind folks, before, contact everyone and get this in place before the transaction happens, right? I've heard too many times where, oh, I had a huge transaction and now I want to contribute. Do it beforehand, please.
Greg, I love that example, and Charity, I love the way you played it out for us, right? I see some increase in the use of illiquid assets, right? Obviously, highly appreciated, publicly traded securities are still funding the majority of people's philanthropy. But second is usually privately held businesses or partnership interests, usually in advance of a liquidity event. And I do think there's a timing element here, right? We do have a generation that is ready finally to transition business ownership and partnership interest ownerships. And the next generation has said loud and clear in lots of ways that they're not always interested. So to the degree that we have families who are struggling through these, Charity, I love that model. Whole family conversation. The other thing that I see a lot is gifts of real property, and it's right along the same lines. It's the family shore house or lake house that no one wants to pay the property taxes on or divide things among the cousins, right? And no one's going up there very much anymore anyway, right? That's a great charitable gift. I do think they're just more mature, appreciated illiquid assets out there, largely in the form of business interests, right? And we have this generation that's got this great timing issue. They're ready to move on. But the challenge with illiquid assets and charitable gifts is always valuation and timing. And so, as I say to all of the advisors across our practice, if your client is aiming for a charitable transaction of an illiquid asset in any particular tax year, please start way earlier with the due diligence than you ever thought necessary, because the valuation piece can be so tricky and the timing is always so tight. Somehow they always come down to the wire, no matter how much time you leave it. So give yourself time.
Elizabeth, you're absolutely right. The advisor does not hold all the keys on this. The advisor holds the keys on a CUSIP transfer. They don't hold all the keys on this, and they need a partner. They need a philanthropic partner. They need an illiquid asset, transactional partner. This is not something that the average advisor can do themselves. So they've got to build a team, and they've got to make this work. I got to get back on my hobby horse, though. One of the reasons the kids don't want these assets, these illiquid assets, is the kids are too old. I mean, face facts, right? We're seeing the inheriting generation well into their presumed retirement years. They don't want to take on a family business when they're already close to retirement. So I think it's a wonderful moment for philanthropy.
You're reminding me, I had a client years ago at the Community Foundation who he and his brother were in their 80s, and they had just inherited, their parents had amazing genetics and great health care. And these two brothers had just finally inherited the family business. And they were making decisions about a sale, and the numbers were just astronomical. And it was so interesting because they'd had everything they ever needed and everything they ever wanted, right? But they kept looking at each other going, we would have liked to have taken a more active role in growing this, but even our kids don't care anymore. Our kids are 55. And so that was really interesting to me. That could have been a multi-generational family legacy. And instead, they sold it. They actually both contributed a portion of their interest in the business into a DAF. Those DAFs became just huge change agents, which was really cool to see. But that sense of family unity lost out. And so I do think as advisors, there's this moment for us to have the conversation, and we never get to tell the client what to do, but we always have the opportunity to ask a question. And so just starting to say, what would your family do if, right? Do you think your kids might be interested down the road, right? Starting some of those conversations around some of these more complex assets. Eventually, a lot of them will end up being charitable anyway, but getting the whole family on the bus, the way Charity described it, is magical. Great outcome.
Even if the answer is, nah, not interested, you got to come back in a year or two and ask the question again. That's the beauty of being the advisor, is you're there over time. And as the family circumstance changes, you can raise the question again and again and help the family make the decision when they're ready to make it.
Absolutely. All right. So we're at the time now, I believe, that hopefully that the audience have submitted a series of questions to ask this fabulous panelist that we have had today. So thank you again. This has been incredible and very informative. So I will go to our host to see if there's any questions for the panel.
Yeah, so we've had a few come in the chat, but please feel free, if you have any others, you can send them in via the chat feature. Greg, I'm going to turn it back over to you, but our first question, for Greg and the panelists is, what strategies do you recommend for clients to maximize the tax benefits of contributing to a DAF? And who is the best person for them to speak to in regard to identifying how they can maximize tax benefits with their donor advised fund or by creating one?
Ooh, we could talk about this for an hour. I want to just take a little bit of a countercultural approach here and say the best strategy is planning, right? Teresa mentioned this earlier. Very few charitable people only express their generosity in one vehicle. It's very unusual. And so think about timing with regard to life stage and age. one of the things I see very consistently is people who build big DAFs during their highest earning years, right? When they're earning the most income, they're charitable, but they're building a fund for later. So they are giving either out of the DAF or also by check on the side, building the DAF through their 60s, right? They hit 70 and a half. They either have thought about retirement or are retired, and they can make QCDs. And so for a couple of years, they leave the DAF alone and they give out of QCDs because for them, from a tax perspective, that achieves their goals. When they get the IRAs down to be right sized, then they circle back to the DAF. And at that point, a lot of times there are grandkids and they start giving with the grandkids out of the DAFs. And it becomes this wonderful way for them to express their values, their family, tell their stories. So you heard how many vehicles were involved there and also how many non-financial goals there are. So that's why I say the best strategy is planning.
Absolutely.
And I would add, for who do you do that with? I would go back to, it needs to be collaborative. It needs to be not just your tax planner, but working with your investment advisor, working with your philanthropic advisor, working with your family, sitting down and talking about strategies. And as Elizabeth said, having a plan that was there along the way. And now you're tweaking it maybe and dusting it off, but revisiting it and making sure that you're doing that often with all of those partners.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
Right. Yeah, does anyone have anything else to add before we go to question 2 from our audience?
One of us has to say, look for the highly appreciated assets, right? One of us has to say, think about timing with regard to the tax consequence. But beyond some of those obvious things, I think there's also a really great opportunity to sit down with clients when you're talking about starting a DAF and saying, okay, talk to me about what you want to get out of this. We can achieve the tax benefits. Is there something else? And so if you haven't had a chance to really dig into the values conversation with your client, right? Because you've been the investment advisor for a long time and you're in your sweet spot and you're really good at what you do and they really trust you. And so maybe they have been busy and they haven't really needed to sit with you. And therefore you have been frustrated that you couldn't build the relationship and deepen it. Right? This is your chance to say, okay, here's how the tax piece might work for you. Let's pull in your accountant. Let's talk to her. But let's also, let's talk to, in a heterosexual couple, the female partner. Let's talk about if you want to include the kids and grandkids. This is a wonderful reset button for an advisor-client relationship when they reach the point of considering a DAF. So in addition to all the great tax benefits, which are indeed wonderful, think about the benefits for us as advisors in that relationship.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
guess I would just add, Greg, before we move on to the next question, I think it's super important that advisors decide that a DAF is a necessary part of their business and that they can't forfeit the DAF to one of the big national houses. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of small towns. I grew up in a small town. I try to promote small towns. We go through this whole buy local movement every fall. Why don't we also do a bank local and invest local and, quite frankly, give local? So I'm very focused on helping and finding ways for local advisors to have locally sponsored DAFs that they can be the front door of, instead of losing that to some national provider and then having their relationship weakened because somebody else is handling the DAF, and it's probably somebody that's not giving personal service anyway.
Michael, we could have a full webinar on that topic as well, and I know my CEO Eric would love to be the main panelist on that one to talk about that discussion. But great comments, absolutely.
All right. So question number 2 from our audience here is, what can the financial services industry introduce to make philanthropy more central to financial institutions and provide a seamless experience for clients entering this space?
So I feel like I might be sounding a little bit like a broken record, but I'm going to use the word education. I don't know that it's anything new. It is talking about what we already do have and incorporating, philanthropy into financial planning because it has so many benefits. Everything from bringing the family together, personal fulfillment, building that legacy, and of course, those tax advantages that we've been talking about. But I don't know that it's necessarily introducing anything new, but educating on the tools that already are out there.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing that I have witnessed, though, related, I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle, is the types of investments that those assets that have been set aside for charitable purpose, how those assets are being invested, who's investing those assets, whether it's the continuum of, kind of screening out companies that don't align with your values, all the way to, making very deliberate private equity investments in companies that are mission driven. And that mission is kind of consistent with your giving mission, to making loans to the nonprofit grantees that you're, gifting to and supporting. So I do think that that's the biggest probably shift that I've seen in the last kind of 20 years is that, people are not only looking at the grants that are going out the door to accomplish their mission, they're looking at how are those investments being made and whether those investments are contributing to their mission.
Mm-hmm.
Teresa, I love that. And I just want to weave your answer together with Mike's last one and say so many of my charitable clients get more strategic over time. And so all of a sudden, they want everything in their portfolios to point at whatever they care about. And so that means they tend to give fewer but larger charitable gifts. It means that they start to explore what local means. And I just love what you just said about that, Mike. Like they want to be close to whatever community feels like home to them. And so because of that, they really struggle. They can give to individual organizations. The old United Way model is mostly dead. So there's not really a way to give across whatever geography feels local to them. And they struggle with investments that feel local, that feel like they're empowering their communities by investing directly in them. They also struggle with this idea of impact metrics. I have a lot of philanthropic clients who talk about being able to understand financial return, but having no idea how to measure social return. And they think about that broadly across the investment spectrum. So that's the dollars they invest with us in the financial markets as we know them today. And that's the dollars they invest in the community, in the social markets that we don't yet understand, right? And so they're really looking for those kinds of metrics. So if I could say two things that the financial services industry could agree on that would make a difference, right? It's some way of expressing a social metric that is performance oriented, right? Mm-hmm. What does that look like? I have no idea. I offer no solutions, but this is a pain point for a lot of my clients. And the other one, helping people center their experiences around what feels local to them, both from an investment of long-term capital and an investment of philanthropic capital perspective.
Yeah.
I appreciate everything you said, Elizabeth. It was very nice of you to be complimentary to me. But I think what's really important here is that too many of our advisors have done what I mentioned in my last comment. They've just sort of left the DAF market. Well, they'll go to Schwab with that. They'll just. But then the donor is completely at the mercy of continuing to get all of those solicitations, and they're not local, and they're not looking at impact, and they're not looking at issue or really driving this thing. I think it's critical for our advisors, and for me that mostly means financial institutions, to be willing to step into this gap and fill some space there. I often tell the story of a small bank I worked with in Southern Ohio, and I happened to be calling on them late in the year, and the trust manager said, "Oh, next week I'm not available. I can't meet with you. Next week I have to drive around and deliver checks." And I said, tell me the story. I love it. Tell me the story. And he said, well, we had a physician pass away a number of years ago. And at this time, 20 years ago, it was an $8 million fund, and it bought fire equipment for rural fire departments. This was a physician in a small town who said, this is a gap in my community, and I want all my resources to do this. And he said, we just, we manage the grant request process, and we gift out the appropriate amounts every year. An institution has to be willing to step into that space and fill that role, and then partner with other people on this panel to figure out where the family's passions are, and then we can make this happen in a community sense.
Yeah, and my comment on this question too, as well, is our clients, they love simplicity, they love ease, they love features, right? So they're really looking, and advisors, they like the same thing. So they're really looking from a technology standpoint, like an all-in-one view of their clients' holistic assets, right? If it's banking, if it's philanthropic, if it's insurance. So, and to this point, I kind of feel like philanthropy and the charitable conversation has been a little bit of an afterthought, and it's making its way in a little bit into the financial services space. But I think to take that next step, I think a lot of organizations can make it more centralized and also integrated into the current planning systems that they're currently utilizing for their clients. And then secondly, Michael, you're absolutely right, because when a family and the next generation, when they're going into their donor advised fund to talk about their values, they see a certain brand when they go into that portal, right? And wouldn't you want that to be the brand of your organization, that you've been working with this family for a number of years, for that family to see, and for those grants to be sent out every single time that they log into their portal? I think the power of brand is a little bit understated in this sense of really interacting with the next generation, and plays a big role moving forward with this whole wealth transfer, and also the 12 trillion that's earmarked for charity.
Well, thank you so much, panelists. We do have some questions coming in, and we only have a couple minutes left. So let me just get through the next one, and let's try to be, I guess, quick in our answers, because I think we have at least 3 more questions that have come in. So I'm going to try to get to them. If not, we will certainly include that in a follow-up email to everyone. So the next one up is in regard to the portals, platforms, and reporting that are involved in donor advised funds, and how or if there's an enhanced platform or streamlined services that can help in providing clients what they need in treating their charitable accounts in the same way that they treat their personal accounts when it comes to wealth management and retirement.
So I'm team charity on this one. I think education is the answer. Charity, thank you for starting the last one off that way. And Michael, I saw you laughed. I mean, I cannot get away from the notion that, yes, my younger clients really want to live their entire financial lives online. But when they want to talk about their giving, they still come see me. When they want to talk about their giving, we have a better conversation over lunch. And so I do think we just have to keep in mind that the most powerful weapon here is advisor education, and that all of this technology reinforces the ways that we're helping clients through their own self-discovery around charitable work. But I think the most powerful thing we can do here is educate ourselves, right? And everyone who's in our businesses, and then help our clients figure out what metrics they really care about, which we hope in their charitable lives are different than they are when we're managing their retirement assets.
Okay, great. So if there's nothing else to add there, I'm going to jump to the next question here. And so this one is in regard to kind of the flip side. How is it that philanthropic individuals and advisors can assess not only the missions that are receiving the grants, but the organizations? And what is the best way to do it? And how can they track performance with the grants or gifts they're being given, but also how can they, see change happening and articulate that to their clients?
If I could just jump in on this, I think this is a really simple one. They should be asking those organizations to prove their value. And if that organization and the solicitor aren't able or willing to do that, they're giving to the wrong place. And I hate to be this way. I mean, I respect all the people in the nonprofit space who are doing that work, but honestly, they need to engage donors at the level we're talking about. We're not talking about small, insignificant, trivial amounts that are given. We're talking about major gifts, and those major gifts should have some value and some reporting and some efficacy. If they don't, that individual needs to find a different charity in the same space that will prove value and effectiveness.
Assess the leadership yourself, right? Get to know the leaders and decide what you really think about them. And my favorite one, ask their partners. See who they claim they work with and ask the partners what they're like to work with. If you feel good after those two conversations, I always say to clients who are donors, you don't have to have any more conversations.
I do think it's important to have an end-to-end defined process for giving that starts with sort of developing your own theory of change or articulating the impact that you want to make. What are the goals of your philanthropic giving? So it starts there. And then that provides the context to identify organizations to give to. Then there's due diligence. Then there's, the type of grant that you're making to the organization, right? Because I think if you're making like a general operating support grant versus a project grant or a capital grant, you're going to be looking at those in different ways, and success is different. And then good practice is to always follow up with reporting. It's necessary to kind of give the opportunity to the organization to articulate the impact that those grant dollars have had.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. We are running out of time. So Greg, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and we'll answer the rest of the questions when we do our follow-up email with the recording for those that weren't able to either attend or stay for the whole time.
Awesome. Thank you all for the participation and the great questions for the panelists. With that being said, while we have the star-studded group, we'd love to close with each of them having closing remarks for the participants. So like we started, I will start with Elizabeth and provide us with our, I guess, guiding and ending remarks going back into our daily lives.
Greg, thank you so much. So the philanthropic conversation is how you take clients where your relationship isn't close and turn them into the kind of people who invite you to family events and weddings forever. This is the place to build relationships. So as advisors, let's remember how powerful the philanthropic tools are, not just for the clients, but for us.
Yeah, perfect. Teresa?
I would add, just don't do it alone. It takes a village. It takes a lot of people seated at the table that have kind of unique perspective to add. And ultimately, I think by working together with other trusted advisors, that the ultimate outcome is greater.
Great. Charity?
I would say, making sure, even today in talking, there's things that I think about listening to other people. So I think education, I've brought that up a few times, but even as advisors, we can educate ourselves more. We should be continuing to do that. And we should be educating clients and making sure that we're staying in front of them, being collaborative with them, and not being their only partner, bringing in other partners.
Perfect. All right, Michael, bring us home.
For individual advisors, you're already in the primary role of owning the relationship, but you've got to broaden this out. You've got to add legacy and intentionality to all these conversations so that you can build the right team, so that you can make this into a multi-generational relationship. That's the key.
Fantastic. So up on the screen, you all see contact information on the GreenHill side. Please, if you have any questions, please reach out to Jack Heron. For the Gifting Network side, please reach out to myself. And again, this is this area of philanthropy is a collaborative focus for all of us. So please reach out if you have any questions or need assistance with anything. But with my closing remarks, I really want to thank all of you that have taken time out of your busy schedule to be with us today, to further learn more about the philanthropic space and why it's so important within the financial wealth management space. And then an even bigger thank you to our panelists. I got to give them a big round of applause. You killed it. These individuals are studs in the respective philanthropic world. So please, I know they're always willing to help. So if anyone has any questions or wants to lean out and ask for their expertise, I know they're always willing to help. So with that being said, that really ends today's webinar, but we look forward to having more webinars with you all moving forward. Have a great day.